Um, Hi, my name is Paco Nathan, and this is a presentation about our recent industry survey. It's analysis of AI in healthcare 2022. This is being conducted by my colleague Ben Lorica, and I put this together through Gradient Flow. And we have been doing this on behalf of Johnson Labs. This is the second year for our AI and healthcare survey. And also, we've done a couple of years of the NLP and industry survey as well, which is closely related. As far as the background, the intent was to learn how AI technologies are currently being used in the healthcare sector. And this survey ran for about 50 days, January to March. Those dates, I'll modify those. It ran January to March in 2022. There were 321 respondents from over 41 countries. Mostly we got in touch with people through social media, online advertising, newsletter, industry partners, etc. And definitely want to give credit to Kathy Yu, Gina Blabber, and Jen Webb for so much crucial assistance. So as far as the background of the survey and the structure of the questions, there's a number of contrasts that we're trying to explore here. One is to measure between, say, mature practices, which have some years of history deploying AI applications in production, versus companies on the other side of the spectrum, which are just exploring, just getting started now. And then in between, there are some companies that are in progress of adoption. So by having that kind of contrast, we can start to see, are there details that emerge, especially in terms of the priorities and mature practices, kind of things that maybe those who are less experienced would not intuitively think to do. Similarly, we have some contrast between those who are technical leaders versus the general respondents. And we're also taking a look at company size and geographic distribution. And so, we have strong technical leadership here, also a strong cohort that are from mature AI practices. And this helps give a good representation for how business decisions are being made about AI in the healthcare sector. So our first dimension here on demographics, the breakdown here you're seeing between the Americas, Asia Pac, and EMEA. EMEA. Clearly, United States has 62%. India follows next with 13%. The remaining 25% are distributed throughout the rest of the world. In terms of roles, almost half the respondents have technical roles. 25% are technical leaders. And so you can see the breakdown here, VP or CXO, Director, Engineering Manager, Architect, and then on into hands-on developer, engineer, data scientist. In terms of company size, the splits actually shifted a little bit compared to last year. It's now 24% were large. Sorry, 26% were large companies, 25% were medium companies, and 48% were small companies. And that represents a slight shift year over year toward larger organizations, but not by an enormous amount. In terms of stages of adoption, 46% were AI practitioners versus 20% who are just exploring AI. And then in between, we have those in the early stage, which accounts for about 28%. So you see the breakdown here. It's roughly half and half. It's 10% versus 8% in terms of those who have AI models in production for 5 or more years versus those who are sort of at a mid stage of being at about 2 to 4 years out. Now, we wanted to break down in terms of really what are the priorities for foundational technologies. And this is always an interesting point, especially for business outlook. For startups which are considering the space, or really for any vendors who are considering the space, investors, etc. What are the priorities expressed for 2022 regarding technologies that need to be used for AI usage in healthcare? And what we see is a very strong signal about data integration needs, healthcare data integration, also about labeling. Data annotation is very high, and needs for data science platform, BI platform, also needs for NLP in general. So you can see the breakdown, especially on the right-hand side, in the contrast between early and mature stage. Um, in some of these cases, you get a really interesting signal where the mature practices are just very, very strong. You can say more than half are expressing a particular point, whereas in other cases, you'll see that they tend to have more agreement, like healthcare data integrations high amongst all respondents, but also amongst technical leaders. And when we take a look at that further, we see about one-third citing business intelligence and data annotation among technologies they're currently using or plan to use by the end of the year. Uh, when we dig into, again, the thought leaders, the technical leaders cite data integration, NLP, data annotation, and BI. And then from the mature organizations, see a very similar signal. I want to call this out because, in contrast to our 2021 survey, in that last year, the top priorities were data integration, natural language, and then BI/data science platform. So what this means is we've seen bubbling up the need for data annotation now becoming one of the top priorities. As far as the intended users this year, this part also changed. Uh, the top targeted users for AI in healthcare are clinicians, healthcare providers, healthcare payers, health IT in general, also drug development professionals. And so this is a really interesting signal. One of the larger changes I would see actually year over year. Um, Close to half indicated that healthcare providers are among their target users. More of the technical leaders cited healthcare payers and drug development professionals as potential users for AI applications. And then from mature organizations, we see health IT, healthcare payers, and drug development also. So this is in contrast. Last year, the survey, the top ones reported were clinicians, providers, and patients. And patients still comes in strong, but more like, say, number 6. So this is interesting because we're seeing more representation of the healthcare payers, and also drug development has really bubbled up on the radar. It was mentioned some previously, but I think that that's probably a lot in response worldwide to pandemic preparation. Um, Now, as far as the data, we've also seen some change. According to mature organizations, text is now the most likely data type used in AI applications. Of course, there's still representation in terms of medical imagery. That's very important. For instance, using deep learning in pathology, radiology, etc. There's also a lot of work with structured data. Certainly, that's coming in strong number 2. Time series data, audio, video, etc. This is in contrast, though. 2022 focus on text is in contrast to 2021, where structured data was the most common data type used for AI applications. So NLP is definitely showing a lot of strength. In terms of software used, technical leaders cited open source software and public cloud providers as clear favorites. Open source is by far the most likely foundation, what we're seeing expressed by mature organizations. And this is not too far off the mark of what we saw last year. I think last year there was definitely more interest forward-looking in budgets, for instance, for commercial SaaS, although it's not showing nearly as strong now. In terms of model validation, over two-thirds of all technical leaders they signal that they prefer in-house evaluation as opposed to using external parties for evaluation. Mature organizations also, they're saying in-house evaluation, and they have priority, you can see here, for tuning models themselves instead of relying on external. And I think this also has bearing on, say, SaaS models. Really, this needs to be done in-house. The criteria for evaluating tools and solutions and services, you can see it. Bar charts here showing the mean responses across these different categories and where the contrasts are. Certainly, the high points are production readiness, state-of-the-art accuracy, uh, scalability to large data sets, and using healthcare-specific models and algorithms. There are also, of course, concerns, priorities toward, fit with the existing software stack. Um, and here's another breakdown, just in terms of, are you evaluating locally installed software libraries or SaaS on your AI projects? But summarization, we can say that mature organizations, their top priorities for evaluation are production readiness, scalability, accuracy, and ability to train and tune models. Technical leaders, it's a similar ones: ability to train and tune models, production readiness, and scalability. Respondents cite the need to fit with the existing stack and availability of healthcare-specific models and algorithms. And this correlates really strongly with what we saw last year as well. Now, in terms of overall observations, uh, we took a look at what does the ecosystem look like as far as startups for AI in healthcare. And so now there are over 40 which have been funded specifically on solutions that either improve healthcare outcomes or reduce overall costs. Um, you can see it somewhat here. We've arranged how much funding they have with regard to healthcare specifically as goals, and then total funding, what kind of categories they're in. But definitely this area is growing. Took a look also at the descriptions of the healthcare AI companies that we were just showing there, and what really pops out is actually drug discovery being highly represented there. Precision medicine, etc., things that are relatively related. In terms of technology trends, text is now the most likely data type used in AI applications. We're also seeing more sophisticated kinds of NLP technologies being used, such as a focus on data annotation, and more sophisticated NLP use cases in turn, such as AI for drug discovery. Um, it's likely that the global pandemic, of course, has accelerated, many areas of medical research. Drug discovery, of course, is especially important as we consider how to prepare for, future pandemics. There's a couple examples of this if you want to dig into detail. For instance, on the data annotation side, there's a project I'm involved with called Rubrics, where we do integrations with Hugging Face and various forms of weak supervision and human in the loop, etc. But it's geared toward, integration of open source for data labeling, and this is complementary with many different NLP platforms. It's really more of the MLOps side, but it's an example of a lot of what we're seeing. That data annotation space is really heated up. For examples of what's going on in drug discovery, I really like, there's a series of talks out of Novartis. Actually, there's a number of other speakers too in related areas, but Stephen Reiling has some talks. Here's one I'm featuring from Graph Connect a few years ago about the use of NLP to build knowledge bases that then they use AI to essentially find where are there potentials for wet lab experimentation that they have not explored yet. Where's the contrast between what their biologists and life science R&D people know about versus what's being reported in the literature? Where's the contrast in that? And then from there, they can steer and prioritize their wet lab experimentation. And of course, others, Roche and others, are publishing about this, but I think it's pretty representative of some of the kind of things we're seeing for NLP related to drug discovery. And also, I just contrast this. We definitely saw indications of this in terms of the 2021 survey for what the mature practices were saying at the time. One of my friends and colleagues, Louis Vuitton from One Football in Berlin did a really nice graph of the data regarding this from our 2021 survey. So in the radar graph, you can see that in-house labeling tool was definitely a priority for the mature team practices, whereas the teams that are sort of mid-range, they're a couple years out, they're moving toward that direction, whereas the ones who are just still getting started exploring, they're not quite headed in that direction, and they tended to use pre-trained models more. So that it's definitely a signal there that once you start getting experience about leveraging AI for healthcare, you learn the importance of working in-house training of models and leveraging labeling tools. And the headlines notwithstanding, we're still in very early stages of applications of AI in clinical settings. There are two separate studies recently that place the number of FDA-approved AI-based algorithms, that is, in the U.S., at less than 100. And there's an article about this in Nature Digital Science. And then also Medical Futurist has a breakdown. Um, Pretty interesting exploration of what those algorithms are, where they're being used, what kinds of use cases. I highly recommend digging into that in more detail. We did a bit of a breakdown here to try to show, the areas of application, what key AI components are being used, versus the current level of FDA approval. So you sort of see this sense of the maturity of the kind of technology versus the maturity of its approval status according to the FDA. Certainly a lot going on in radiology with regards, obviously using deep learning for computer vision. And also just a key phrase analysis, detection of chest X-rays. Yeah, you can definitely see that coming from radiology, but there's other areas too where we're getting a pretty interesting signal of what's on the rise. Now, having said this, there's an elephant in the room, and that is with regard to security. And we need to be cognizant of this, especially, we need to prioritize this very much because to the extent that AI in healthcare is increasingly relying on open source and public cloud providers, there are security concerns that are naturally escalating in enterprise, and these will have substantial impact on the development and use of NLP technologies for AI in healthcare. Because really anything can be used as a vector, virtually anything can be used as a vector for cyber attacks. But certainly what we're doing with AI provides a very compelling attack surface. Um, World superpowers, non-state actors alike, faced off in cyber attacks during last year. There was this huge surge, and now due to the war in Europe, this has escalated. I would point in particular some of my resources on this. Team Camry at the bottom, and OODA Loop at the top. Also, there's a report just out from Sonic Wall. Some of the stats from there are extremely compelling and worrisome. In healthcare, cyber attacks during 2021 rose 71% on IoT devices, 121% on malware, 218% for cryptojacking, and 755% spike in ransomware. These run much higher than in other sectors. So healthcare infrastructure has become a top target for threat actors. In some cases, legacy software is no longer even being updated because of the overwhelming security vulnerabilities, as we've seen with the Log4j zero-day vulnerabilities, and there's other Linux zero-day vulnerabilities that have surfaced over the past couple of weeks. This area is really heating up. So it underscores security needs closely related to just how much pressure is being put on MLOps in enterprise. And those of us who are vendors in this space certainly should be mindful to try to help streamline, what is it that MLOps people in enterprise need to do because they're so short-staffed when it comes to instrumentation, validation, verification, just overall operational process, and the subsequent security costs that they imply. This is where NLP open source, which can be leveraged by AI in healthcare, can really make a difference. And with that, If you want to get a hold, the slides are online. We'll post a link to that. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'm here. Thank you very much.